In this video, we're going to continue with our review. We want to talk about the shape of distribution and the scale of measurement, and how does this information inform our decision on what is the best measure of central tendency? What is appropriate to describe the center of our data based on shape and scale of measurement? So the shape of the distribution determines what measure of central tendency is appropriate. We know that, right? But let's review. So in the center, we have our symmetrical distribution. When our data is symmetrical, the mean, median, and mode are going to be the same value. What do we choose? In psychology, we typically use the mean. That's the one that we most frequently report. And when our data is symmetrical, that would be our choice, the mean. But when our data is skewed, whether it's negatively or positively, the mean is no longer the center of the data, no longer the center of the distribution. In fact, the mean is super sensitive to outliers or more extreme scores. This is because the mean is computed by taking all the values in the data set, adding them together, dividing by the total number of values in the data set, which means if we have one score that is higher or lower than all the others, it's really going to have an impact on that value, which means it's no longer going to reflect the center of that data. So the point here that we're trying to make is that the median is more appropriate when we have skewed data because it is not sensitive to outliers. We don't compute it. It actually is the center value of the data where 50% of the scores are below and 50% of the scores are above the median. So the median is what we use when our data is skewed, when we have those extreme or outlying values. Let's look at two examples of skewed data. This sometimes is really helpful in sort of understanding what we mean by skewed and the impact of one or more outlying or more extreme scores. So if we look at this negatively skewed distribution here, this is reflective of exam scores. We typically see exam scores more positive with students performing better on the exam than they do poorly. That's just typical. However, if we have one student who didn't study and got a low score, this is going to skew the data. So they've pulled the distribution over to the left-hand side, right? So we can see that the influence of one bad exam score can really affect the shape of the distribution of the exam scores, which would really sort of pull down the average score if we were using the mean. So the mean would no longer be the average exam score for this distribution. So the median would break up the exam scores with 50% of the exam scores being above and 50% being below. And that one score, that low score, no longer has an effect on the center, and that really reflects the center or the average exam score. In contrast, if we look at our positively skewed distribution, this is income. And we can see that it's being pulled over to the right here. And this could be because maybe we had one billionaire that's been in the data set. That one billionaire is pulling our income over to the right and making it positively skewed. So now we have that one billionaire in with our data sets really going to inflate the mean, meaning that it's not going to be representative of the center of the distribution. So the mean, again, is really sensitive to outliers or more extreme scores, which is what this billionaire would be. So we would use the median. So then again, that's going to be our average income. And typically when we're looking in the real world, we see median income or median house prices. These are all things that can be impacted by really high values. So the median is more appropriate to report in those cases. And in some areas of psychology, we're using these kinds of, income or housing prices or other things that are really impacted by extreme values. Okay, so now we talked about the shape. Let's review again how the scales and measurement and shape work together for us to determine what is the appropriate measure of central tendency. So we use the mean when our data is quantitative. It could be either interval or ratio scaled. When it's symmetrical, the mean is the most appropriate measure of central tendency. The median is used when our data is ordinal scaled or is quantitative and skewed either negatively or positively. Lastly, the mode is used when we have a nominal scaled data. And that makes sense. What is the most frequently occurring category in our data? And that is the center. So that's a little review of our scales of measurement and the shape of distribution and how that impacts our choice of the appropriate measure of central tendency.